The city of Jerusalem is mentioned in numerous places in the Bible, from the early pages of Genesis right through to the penultimate chapters in the book of Revelation. In fact, over 60% of the books of the Bible talk about Jerusalem in some form or other. So I think just from those facts alone, you can see that Jerusalem plays a very important part in the Holy Scriptures. And that's what we're going to look at this evening. We'll start, God willing, by looking at some of the history of Jerusalem. And then we'll soon see that God has a very special relationship with that city, which we'll look at a little bit. And we'll also look at a number of prophecies that the Bible includes, some that have already taken place and some that are still to be fulfilled in the future. So we'll look at some of those. And we'll see as part of that Jerusalem has a part to play long into the future as well, and we'll explore what that is. And then finally we'll bring this home, because what we'll see as we go through is that it becomes a subject that is very personal to every one of us, or will be very personal to each one of us in the future, and we'll end by looking at that. So let's start then by looking at some of the history of the city of Jerusalem. And we'll start by going back to some of the very early pages of our Bibles in Genesis, when Jerusalem was a Canaanite city. Canaan, that was the name of the land at that time, and Canaanites were the people who lived there. If you have a Bible with you and you'd like to come with me, we go to Genesis chapter 14. So this is the first time the city of Jerusalem is mentioned in the Bible. It's in the time of Abraham. Now, what's happened here, his nephew has been taken captive by some attacking armies. Abraham has gone after those armies and he's overthrown them, and he's brought back his nephew Lot. And on his way back from that victory, he's met by a king. Let's go in at verse 18 of Genesis 14. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem. Salem, that's the old word for Jerusalem. So here we are. Melchizedek, king of Jerusalem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And he gave him a tithe of all. Now, the New Testament looks back on that event when Abraham met this King Melchizedek, and it's quite a long and sort of deep theological argument. We're not going to look at it in detail. Let me just quickly read to you this passage, a bit from Hebrews chapter 7. Don't worry about the detail, just look at this sort of top level message of what it tells us. This Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a tenth part of all. So that's what we've just read. First being translated King of Righteousness, then also King of Salem, which means King of Peace, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, remains a priest continually. Therefore, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need was there that another priest should arise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not be called according to the order of Aaron? For the priesthood being changed of necessity is also a change of the law. So quite a complicated theological argument. We're not going to go into the details of that. What I want to point out is that the New Testament looks back to the first time we came across Jerusalem, and it says it's very significant. And it emphasises for us about the meaning of Jerusalem. So the king who came to meet him was the King of Peace. Jerusalem is described as the city of peace. And here the writer of the Hebrews is telling us this is very symbolic. It even links it to the Son of God and the priesthood. Okay? So, very first time here, time we came across Jerusalem, there's a lot of symbology going on, and we'll see some more of that in a minute. Second time we come across the city of Jerusalem is when the people are led by Joshua and they go over the Jordan, they go into the land of Israel and start to capture the cities. Now, if you come with me to Joshua chapter 15, we'll see that when they capture all the other cities, they don't succeed in capturing Jerusalem, the city of peace. So if you look at Joshua chapter 15, and look at verse 63. So it's from about verse 20, it's listed all the cities that they've captured and started to take possession of. Verse 63, as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judah could not drive them out, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Israel at Jerusalem to this day. So here we're up into Joshua's time. Children of Israel still do not occupy fully the city of Jerusalem. They couldn't throw out its inhabitants. Now if we go on to the time of the Judges and chapter 1, we see there after Joshua's death they have another go at Jerusalem, a little more successfully this time. Judges 1 and verse 8. Now the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it, and struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. So they've captured the city at this point, but it appears that they do not actually inhabit it. And it quickly goes back to being a Jebusite city. The people of the land simply go back in again. And we know that because if you go on to chapter 19, we'll see here that the Canaanites are back in the city of Jerusalem, and Israel does still not really own the city. Now, Leviticus 19 is a story about a Levite. He's on a journey coming back with his servant, and it's getting dark, and they're coming past Jerusalem as it starts to get dark. Look at what he says about it in verse 10. However, the man was not willing to spend that night, so he rose and departed and came to opposite Jabus, that is Jerusalem. With him were the 2 saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. They were near Jabus, and the day was far spent, and the servant said to his master, "Come, please, let's turn aside into this city of the Jebusites to lodge in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside here into a city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah." So here in Judges 19, we see it's still not an Israelite city. Okay? And in fact, it's only when we come to the time of King David that it finally comes to be owned by the children of Israel. Now, David had 2 encounters with Jerusalem. The first one was before he was a king. You remember when he fought their great warrior Goliath. And remember at the end of that battle, David cuts off Goliath's head. Now, what does he do with it? Remember what he does with the head once he's cut it off? Well, if you come with me to 1 Samuel chapter 17, you'll see that David took the head and he carries it and he goes over to Jerusalem. 1 Samuel 17, if you look at verse 54. Then David took the head of the Philistine and he brought it to Jerusalem, but put his armour in his tent. So he goes there. It's still a Jebusite city at this time. And you can imagine David standing there at the gates of the city holding the head of Goliath above his head, saying, this is what I've done to your great warrior, and I want to come back and do the same to you. Right? The sort of I'll be back kind of message to the people of the city. And sometimes later, when he is king, he comes back again to the city and fulfills his threat. So if you go on to 1 Chronicles 11, we can see there that David, after he's been throned, comes back and fulfills his threat and captures the city of Jerusalem. So 1 Chronicles 11 verse 4. And David and all Israel went to Jerusalem, which is Jabus, where the Jebusites were, the inhabitants of the land. The inhabitants of Jabus said to David, "You shall not come in here." Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. And David said, "Whoever attacks the Jebusites first shall be chief and captain." And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, went up first and became chief. Then David dwelt in the stronghold. Therefore they called it the city of David. So here at last, only when we come to the time when David is king, does the city of peace finally become owned by the children of Israel. David repairs it, And it becomes known, as we were told there, as the City of David, or the Old City. Now, note that, because that is very important a bit later, as we'll see. So remember then, when David finally has the city, it's called either the Old City or the City of David. Now let's leave the history of Jerusalem there for a moment, and let's look now at the history of a place called Mount Moriah. And you'll see in a moment why this is relevant. So what we'll do again, we'll go back to the early pages of Genesis and look at some of the history of Mount Moriah. And the first time it comes up again is in the time of Abraham. If you come with me to Genesis 22, and we see here that this is the place where Abraham was sent to sacrifice his son. First couple of verses of Genesis 22. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. Then he said, Take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. And we know the story, don't we? Abraham does as he's told. He goes to Mount Moriah, he takes his son with him, and he prepares to sacrifice him. And he's there with the sort of dagger raised above his son, ready to kill him. And God sends an angel and says, Stop, don't kill him. I see now that you'll do as I ask you. And God provided a ram that Abraham was then able to sacrifice instead. And do you see all the fantastic symbology we have there? Abraham's son, his only son, his son who was born through a miracle, who was taken to Mount Moriah to be sacrificed. Again, just as with Jerusalem, we have all the symbology there, this time looking forward to when God would allow his son, his only son, born through a miracle, to be sacrificed. Okay, so again, a lot of symbology when we first come across Mount Moriah. Now the next time is a bit later, again it comes up in the time of David. Now David, at one point in his rule, made an enormous error of judgment. And God brought punishment on the children of Israel because of that, and a plague swept across the land. And the place where that plague stopped was at a place called the threshing floor of Ornan. Now, at the time, we're not really told where that is. We're told that God stopped, that David made a sacrifice at this point where the plague was stopped. And we're told it was owned by Ornan, who was called the Jebusite. So we know he's in that same part of the country, but we don't know exactly where that is. In a moment, you'll see we find later on where it is. The next time Mount Moriah comes up is in the time of David's son Solomon. If you come with me to 2 Chronicles chapter 3, we'll see that this is the point where Solomon built the temple. So 2 Chronicles and chapter 3. Now Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Where did he build it? On Mount Moriah. Look what the writer adds here. Where the Lord had appeared to his father David, at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Okay, so we're told that not only was Mount Moriah the place where Abraham, in effect, sacrificed his son, we're told it's also the place where David made a sacrifice to God to thank him for stopping the plague. It's also the point where Solomon builds the temple to the Lord. Now, many historians also put forward evidence to suggest that Golgotha, where of course Jesus was crucified, was also on Mount Moriah. Although I'm not sure that evidence is totally agreed upon. But a lot of historians put forward that argument that that is the place where Jesus was crucified. So really what we very much see here is that Mount Moriah has a very important history of great sacrifices right back to the time of Abraham. Okay, so that's the history of Mount Moriah, but where is it? Well, you'll see in a moment that the relevance to tonight's talk. Here's a sort of sketch map of the area, and in particular there's three mountains really that we'll look at. Now, I don't know how well you can see the picture in the top right hand corner, but what you can see is that area when we talk about mountains. These are not great pointy mountains with snow on the top like we see in Europe. They're more sort of rounded hills. Okay? And there's three in particular. Mount Zion is that one just there. Then this is Mount Moriah that we've just been talking about next to it. And the other one, important, is the Mount of Olives, which is just on that side of the Valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, the city of David, then, the original Jebus, that's roughly there on the foot of Mount Zion. Okay, so when we're talking about the city that David captured, it's that bit there. Now, Solomon extended the walls of that city further. He extended them there when he built the temple. So now we're up to this area here. And then in the time of Nehemiah extended out the back there, and the whole of this area, then encompassing Mount Zion as well, is what's known as the Jerusalem. It's kind of the area that, for the sprawl that we have these days of Jerusalem. So when the Bible talks about Mount Zion or Mount Moriah or Jerusalem, it's all that area here that we're talking about. Okay, so you can see why Mount Moriah is kind of so much intertwined with the history of Jerusalem as well. They're very much one and the same thing. And what we see in the page of the Bible is that God has a very special relationship with this city of Jerusalem. Let me put a few passages up on here on the screen for you. Back in Kings, we read, Jerusalem, the city which the Lord has chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. In the Psalms, we're told this is the mountain which God desires to dwell in. Yes, the Lord will dwell in it forever. In Chronicles, we're told that in Jerusalem shall my name be forever. And that's God speaking. And then in Psalm 132, the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it, says God. All right, so we can see God has very special feelings about the city of Jerusalem. Let's just look at some of the phrases there. In Jerusalem shall my name be forever. God will dwell in it forever. This will be my resting place forever. Okay, so we see that not only has God had a special relationship with it in the past, but God is saying this special relationship is going to continue forever into the future. Okay? And therefore it's not surprising, is it, that the Bible has a lot of prophecies about Jerusalem. We're going to look at three. We'll look at one about the ownership of Jerusalem. We will look at what the prophecies talk about, what will happen in Jerusalem when Jesus Christ comes back. And we'll look at Jerusalem for the long-term future. Okay, so they're the three that we'll look at, God willing, this evening. And we're going to be quite brief on those. The first one I want to talk about then is the ownership of the Jews by the Gentiles. And I want to introduce this by taking you to some words of Jesus in Luke 21. This is what Jesus said to his disciples about what would happen to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. He said that they would fall by the edge of the sword, be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trampled by Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. So what Jesus is saying about Jerusalem is that the time is going to come shortly afterwards, that Jerusalem is going to be attacked, that the people were going to either be led away or killed by the sword. And of course that started to happen in AD 70, didn't it, when the Romans came down and attacked the city of Jerusalem. But in particular, what I want to notice Jesus' phrase here about the times of the Gentiles. Okay, so that's the period of time for which he says Jerusalem would be, as he uses the phrase, trampled by the Gentiles. What Jesus is saying is there will be the fixed time period in which the Gentiles are allowed to have ownership of Jerusalem and the city and the tabernacle. But that will be for a fixed time. So what is that time of the Gentiles? Well, to try and answer that, I think we need to go to an Old Testament prophecy in the book of Daniel. If you come with me to Daniel chapter 8, please. And we'll see what this prophet had to say. Now, Daniel recorded his dreams that he had. Now, in this dream, in Daniel chapter 8, he sees two animals fighting. And let's just look at verses 3 through to 7. So this is Daniel talking about what he sees in his dream. I lifted up my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram which had 2 horns. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, southward, so that no animal could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand. But he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. Then he came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and ran at him with furious power. I saw him confronting the ram, and he was mocked with rage against him, attacked the ram, broke his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Okay, so that's Daniel's dream. He sees this ram, and he sees this goat coming, attacking the ram and overpowering him. Now, fortunately for us, an angel speaks to Daniel and explains to Daniel what this dream means. So if you go down to verse 20, the angel explains to him that the ram which you saw, that was the first animal, having 2 horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. And male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between its eyes is the first king. So what Daniel's dream means then, we're being told, is that it's talking about the time when the Medo-Persian and the Persian Empire will be overthrown by the Greeks. Okay, so that's what he's talking about. Well, what's the significance to what we're talking about here? Well, if you go to verse 13 and 14, I think you can see why this is significant. Verse 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation and giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. So you can see there quite a lot of similarities to some of the phrases Jesus was using, can't you? About the sanctuary being trampled underfoot by Gentiles. In his dream, he's told that in the sort of his dream, that was be 2,300 days later. Now we know from elsewhere in the dreams of Daniel that one day in his dream equates to 1 year in prophecy. So we can do some sums, can't we? So we've been told there's 2,300 years between that battle. So when the Persian Empire is overthrown by the Greeks, from that there will be 2,300 years. And at that point, the tabernacle will no longer be trampled by Gentiles. So let's do our sum. So to start that sum, we need to know when the Persian Empire was overthrown by the Greeks. Like most people perhaps these days, I turn to Wikipedia. You might not be able to see this, it's a little bit small on the screen. Wikipedia says this. The Battle of Issus occurred in southern Anatolia in November 333 BC. The invading troops led by Alexander, of course, as we all know, was the famous Greek commander. They were outnumbered more than 2 to 1, yet they defeated the army personally led by Darius III of Persia. The battle was a decisive Macedonian victory, and it marked the beginning of the end of Persian power. So according to Wikipedia, the point at which the Persian power was overthrown was 333 BC. So that's the point we have in Daniel's prophecy. So let's do our sum. So 333, and remembering, of course, that BC was negative. So 333 BC, we add on the 2,300 years of Daniel's dream, and we get to 1967 AD. So what was special about 1967? Well, 1967 was the year that saw what became known as the Six-Day War. Now, to understand what happened, I need to give you a little bit of explanation to how the land was divided after the Second World War. So, after the Second World War, the Jews were given a land to own as their own, which is marked by this orange here. And note, there's like this big bite taken out the side of the land they're given. And this was given to Jordan, this area around here. Now Jerusalem, as you see, is on that kind of, that nose sticking into that area that's bitten out. So there's Jerusalem. Now, if we zoom in a bit more into Jerusalem, this orange line is that line round here, showing the border of the land Israel was given after the Second World War. Okay? And here's Jerusalem. Now, remember I said when we were talking about David, that what was very significant was the original city, the old city, the city of Jabus, the city of David. That's this bit marked here, it just sees the old city. But the significant point is the border of the land that they were given cuts out the old city. So when they were given their land in 1949, they were not given the old city of David. That was given to the Jordanians. Okay? So what about 1967? Now I've got a video I'd like to play for you here. It came from a brilliant documentary made by the BBC called The 50 Years' War. And in this documentary they looked at all the battles going on in Israel and how they had fed. I'm going to play you a short extract when they talk about the Six-Day War in 1967.
At 9 a.m. on the first day of the war, just after destroying Egypt's air force, the Israelis had contacted the King of Jordan.
אמרנו לו, זה בינינו לבין המצרים. אני לא יודע אם הוא דיבר על זאת. אם אתה לא תיכנס לעניין, שום דבר לא יקרה.
But the king felt he had to join the war against Israel because half his subjects were dispossessed Palestinians.
If Jordan took any other action or any other course, Jordan would place itself in a position of disintegrating from within, leading to an Israeli occupation of Jordan anyway.
בערך ב-10:30, 11, משהו כזה, התחיל להפגיז גם לאורך הקו הירוק. ואנחנו הסתכלנו אחד על השני בפיקוד, אני הייתי אז בעמדת הפיקוד, ואמרנו זה לא יפה. ואמרנו אם ככה לוקחים אותו.
The Israelis seized the chance to fulfill a 2,000-year-old dream, to gain control of the old city of Jerusalem. They fought their way to the hills overlooking the city.
הסתכלנו למטה על העיר העתיקה, זה היה מראה פנטסטי. יום יפה, שמש, גולדן דום, מבריק בשמש. בוודאי הייתה הרגשה שהאום עומד להתערב. אז חשבתי לעצמי, תכף ייתנו לנו פקודה של הפסקת אש. איך אני אסתכל על עצמי בעיני ההיסטוריה? זה לא בא בחשבון.
Before he could move on Jerusalem, the general needed the okay.
אז חיים ברלב אומר, עוזי, יש לך אישור של הממשלה להיכנס לעיר עתיקה. צריך לעשות את זה מהר ובשכל.
It took the Israelis 10 hours of street-to-street fighting to capture the city. When the troops were on the brink of victory, their commanding officer received a call from the defense minister.
משה דיין היה איש חכם ואיש יחסי ציבור מדרגה ראשונה. הוא הודיע, אני בא לירושלים, תחכה לי. דיין בא, 10 עיתונאים וצלמים ומובי קאמרה, והוא רצה שהרגע של הכניסה שלו לעיר העתיקה, זה יהיה הרגע ההיסטורי הרשמי.
When the battle ended, Jordan had lost not only the old city, but all the land it held on the west bank of the Jordan River.
I went out to the front and I could see people crossing over in small groups, very tired. You know, all the years that I had spent since 1953 trying to build that country and build that army, all the pride, all the hopes, I saw it just destroyed. I never received a more crushing blow than that.
Now, they've just been explaining, in this documentary, that they've spoken to everyone involved, and they have very candid discussions about what happened. They spoke to the Egyptian rulers and the Egyptian army. They speak to the Jordanian army and the Jordanian king. They speak to the Israeli rulers at the time and their army, and they talk to the Russians. And they're all very candid about what happened. And what I hadn't realised until I heard this documentary was the involvement in the Russians. And they deliberately sparked the Six-Day War. And they speak to the Russians involved, who quite honestly and openly say, well, it was all because of what was happening in Vietnam. And the Russians thought that the Americans were losing their grip on Vietnam. And the Russians wanted to push home that advantage. And they thought, what better way to do that than to distract the Americans from Vietnam? And to do that, let's spark trouble in the Middle East. And what they did was they sent ambassadors to Egypt, and they all admit this openly on this documentary. They sent them down to Egypt to say, did you know that the Israelis are mustering all their troops and their tanks on the Syrian border? They're about to invade Syria. So the Egyptians send up their reconnaissance to the border, and they come back and say, well, no, there's no sign of any Israeli army on the border with Syria. The Russians come back to them and say, oh, absolutely, they are. They're definitely about to invade Syria. And they started rumours in the whole of the Middle East saying Israel is about to attack Syria. In the end, the Egyptians say they felt they had no choice but to go and fight against Israel because of what they were being told. Israel saw what was happening and said, well, we've got to make the first strike, otherwise we'll be wiped out. And they send their air force across and they totally wipe out the Egyptian air force before the Egyptian air force can take off from the ground at all. Now, and so exactly as Daniel had prophesied many years before, Israel then takes possession of the old city of Jerusalem, and the time of the Gentiles had ceased. There's also other prophecies that talk about what will happen at Jerusalem in the future, and we'll look at a couple of those now. In Zechariah chapter 14, we look towards the future now about another great battle. So we saw there one great battle actually taking place. Zechariah 14, we're told that another one will happen at the return of Jesus, again centred around Jerusalem. So could we read please Zechariah chapter 14?
Zechariah 14. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. And I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth, and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. And ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains, for the valley of the mountains shall reach unto Azal. Yea, ye shall flee, like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah king of Judah. And the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. And it shall come to pass in that day that the light shall not be clear nor dark, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night. But it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. And it shall be in that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea, and half of them toward the hinder sea. In summer and in winter shall it be. And the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day there will be one Lord, and his name one. All the land shall be turned as the plain from Geba to Rimmon south of Jerusalem, and it shall be lifted up and inhabited in her place. From Benjamin's gate unto the place of the first gate, unto the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananeel unto the king's winepresses. And men shall dwell in it, and there shall be no more utter destruction, but Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. And this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongue shall consume away in their mouth. And it shall come to pass in that day that a great tumult from the Lord shall be among them, and they shall lay hold every one on the hand of his neighbour, and his hand shall rise up against the hand of his neighbour. And Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together, gold and silver and apparel in great abundance. And so shall be the plague of the horse and of the mule, and of the camel and of the ass, and of all the beasts that shall be in these tents, as this plague. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the feast of the tabernacles. And it shall be that whosoever will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come not, that have no rain, there shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the feast of tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all nations that come not up to keep the feast of the tabernacles. In that day there shall be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots of the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts, and all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them, and seethe therein. And in that day there shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts.
There's also a prophecy in the book of Joel which very much covers the same sort of events. I've got a few bits of that on the screen here for you. The prophet Joel said, "Assemble and come all you nations, prepare for war to the valley of Jehoshaphat. The day of the Lord is near, the sun and moon will grow dark. The Lord shall roar from Jerusalem, the heavens and earth shall shake. But the Lord will be a shelter. So you shall know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then Jerusalem shall be holy, and no stranger shall pass through her again." So if you put those two prophecies together, these are some of the pictures we see of what will happen when Christ returns. There will be another large battle in the future, centred again on Jerusalem. We're told that this time Jerusalem will be largely overthrown. But at that point, God will intervene and Jesus will return to the Mount of Olives. We're also told there'll be a great earthquake and there'll be great confusion among the attacking armies. So much confusion, in fact, that we're told they end up fighting each other and are therefore all overthrown. And the conclusion is that God will be worshipped from Jerusalem. So that's the picture we have of what is going to be happening shortly. Now I'd just like to just spend a moment just dwelling on the fourth point there about this great earthquake that will take place. And I want to do that simply because I was very interested by an article I saw some years ago by NBC News entitled "Jerusalem's Old City at Risk of Earthquake." And what they say there is that some Israeli scientists have warned that another major earthquake appears likely to strike the Holy Land in the next 50 years. Now, they explain the reason. The Great Rift Valley runs for 3,000 miles between Syria and Mozambique and passes through the Dead Sea below Jerusalem's eastern walls. The fault line was caused by the separation of African and Eurasian tectonic plates 35 million years ago, a split that weakened the Earth's crust. About 35 miles to the north, another fault line cuts the land east to west from the Mediterranean port of Haifa with the west bank towns of Jenin and Nablus before reaching the Jordan River. This is a very active area which may produce a large earthquake once in a while, Bien said. Okay, so the scientists are warning in about, well, that was, 15 years ago, 13 years ago, there'll be an earthquake, they said then, in about 50 years they were predicting. So what they were talking about in the tectonic plates was this. So we have the Arabian plate here, a Eurasian plate moving that way, and the African plate moving up. So you can see that it's twisting and pulling the land apart round here. And this is Jerusalem. There's another fault line running up here. Okay, so that's what they're talking about, those plates moving, ripping the land apart in that point. Now if we zoom in a bit, if you look at a relief map of the area on the right, this is the Jordan Valley. You can just see from looking down on it how the land is being ripped apart along this area here as those plates move. Now if you zoom in again a bit more on the left, this is the area around the Dead Sea. This is the Dead Sea Basin that's formed because of the land pulling apart, and that's what forms that Dead Sea Basin. If you look at where Jerusalem is, it's right on the edge of this area here where it's being pulled apart. And these little crosses are the sort of fold lines in the land. So what the scientists are saying, with all these fold lines here on Jerusalem, right around here, that this is an area that's going to see a large earthquake. And their feeling was, from what they've been looking at, that the plates are about to go like that again, which will cause a big earthquake. And I thought that was interesting, bearing in mind what we've seen in those prophecies about an earthquake in the land in Jerusalem at the time of Christ's return. I thought it was interesting to see that scientists are predicting the same sort of thing. But beyond all that, beyond the great earthquake, beyond the bloodshed and the battle and all the horrific things we're going to be told will take place at that time, we're also told Jerusalem will have a glorious future. I put some quotes here, mainly from Isaiah. Isaiah 62. For Zion's sake I will not hold my peace. For Jerusalem's sake I will not rest until her righteousness goes forth as brightness and her salvation as a lamp that burns. One from Ezekiel. The name of the city from that day shall be the Lord is there. Isaiah 62 again. Give him no rest until he establishes, until he makes Jerusalem a praise in the earth. And Isaiah 35. The ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy on their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So what we're being told is that beyond the bloodshed and the battle, the time will come when there will be everlasting joy in Jerusalem, when there will be no more sorrow or sighing, but instead there will be joy and gladness. It's a glorious future that we're told Jerusalem will look forward to. Because, as we said early on, because God has this special relationship with this city. Now let me just end by pointing out that this isn't just what's happening to a foreign city 1,000 miles away, but it's something that's going to impact every one of us in the future. Let me take you back to some words of Jesus. This comes just after what Jesus said when we put up on the screen about the time Jerusalem would first be taken. He went on from that to say that they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now when you see these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. So just see how now this is suddenly becoming a personal message, isn't it? Something that we should be reacting to, right? Lift up your heads, he says, because your redemption draws nigh. Your redemption, your salvation. It suddenly becomes something very personal to each one of us, because these world-changing events that will take place at Jerusalem, as we've seen, will roll out to encompass the whole world and will impact every person. And so we need to take action in our lives now so that when those things do happen, we will be ready for them. And that's the sort of topics that are often covered from this platform.